I'm Eleanor, and the day my mother sold my piano to pay off my sister's $12,000 debt was the day I realized love could be a transaction measured in dollars and IOUs, not in heartbeats or promises. I was 22, still living in the cramped, yellowing house in Erie, Pennsylvania, where the air always smelled faintly of motor oil from the garage next door. That piano, a scratched-up Baldwin upright, wasn't just wood and keys. It was my sanctuary, my rebellion, my proof that I could create something beautiful in a world that kept telling me I wasn't enough. And then it was gone, hauled away by two men in coveralls. While I stood in the driveway, my hands shaking my voice, too small to stop them. My mother didn't even look at me when she handed over the bill of sale. "It's just a piano, Ellie," she said, her voice sharp, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Lila needed the money. You'd understand if you cared about family." That was the first wound, the one that cut so deep I didn't know how to bleed. I grew up in a house where love was rationed like wartime supplies, and I was always last in line. My mother, Diane, was a woman of hard edges and harder choices, a single mom who wore her sacrifices like a crown. She worked double shifts at the diner, her hands perpetually chapped from dishwater, and she never let us forget it. Lila, my older sister by 4 years, was her golden child, the one who could do no wrong even when she did everything wrong. Lila was beautiful in the way that stopped conversations. Blonde curls, a laugh like wind chimes, and a knack for making people believe her lies. She'd been in and out of trouble since she was 16. Shoplifting, a DUI, a string of boyfriends who left bruises or broken leases. By the time she was 26, she'd racked up $12,000 in credit card debt, maxing out cards for clothes vacations and a car she crashed 2 months later. My mother always bailed her out, emptying savings accounts, taking out loans, selling off what little we had. I was the afterthought, the quiet one who didn't make waves, who practiced scales in the living room while the world revolved around Lila's chaos. The piano came into my life when I was 8, a gift from my grandmother Ruth before she passed. She was the only one who saw me, really saw me not as a shadow of Lila, but as Eleanor, the girl who hummed melodies before she could speak. "This is yours, Ellie," she'd said, her hands trembling as she pressed the keys. "It's your voice when words fail you." I taught myself to play, pouring hours into Chopin and Debussy, my fingers finding a language my tongue never could. By high school, I was good enough to win local competitions, good enough for my music teacher, Mrs. Callahan, to whisper about Juilliard, though we both knew we couldn't afford it. The piano was my escape from a house where I was invisible, where my mother's love was a currency I could never earn. I'd play until my shoulders ached, until the world outside faded, until I could pretend I was enough. That day in the driveway, watching the piano disappear down the street, I felt something break inside me, something fragile I hadn't known was there. I didn't cry, not then. I just stood there, the November wind cutting through my thin sweater, my mother's words echoing in my head. "You'd understand if you cared about family." I wanted to scream that I was family too, that I'd spent years swallowing my needs so Lila could have hers, that I'd never asked for anything except that damn piano. But I didn't. I went inside, packed a bag, and left for my friend Mara's apartment across town. I didn't tell my mother I was going. I didn't trust my voice not to betray me. Mara's place was a 1-bedroom, above a laundromat, the kind of apartment where the heat never worked right, and the walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors' fights. She was my best friend since 10th grade, the only person who knew how deep the cracks in my family ran. "Stay as long as you need," she said, tossing me a blanket and a pillow for the couch. I didn't sleep that night. I kept seeing the piano, imagining it in some stranger's house, their kids banging on the keys I'd polished with my own hands. I thought about my mother, how she hadn't even asked me before making the decision, how she'd looked at me like I was selfish for caring. I thought about Lila, who hadn't even been there, probably off with her latest boyfriend, oblivious to the wreckage she'd caused. And I thought about myself, how I'd let this happen, how I'd spent my life being small so others could be big. The next morning, I called Mrs. Callahan. She was retired by then, living in a little house by the lake, but she'd always told me I could reach out. They sold my piano. I said, my voice cracking for the first time. I told her everything: Lila's debt, my mother's betrayal, the way I felt like I was disappearing. She listened the way she always did, and then she said, "Eleanor, you are not your piano. You are the music, and no one can take that from you." Her words were a lifeline, a thread I could hold on to when everything else was unraveling. She invited me to come over to talk, to play on her old Steinway. I went that afternoon, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. Mrs. Callahan's house smelled of lavender and old books, and her piano was a thing of beauty, its keys worn but warm, like they'd been loved for decades. I played for hours, my fingers clumsy at first, then finding their rhythm. I played pieces I hadn't touched in years, letting the music say what I couldn't. Mrs. Callahan sat in her armchair, her eyes closed, a small smile on her lips. When I finished, she handed me a cup of tea and said, "You need to keep playing, Eleanor. Not for them, not for anyone else, for you." She told me about a community college nearby with a music program affordable enough for me to manage with a part-time job. She offered to write me a recommendation to help me apply for scholarships. It wasn't Juilliard, but it was something, a path forward when I'd thought there was none. I spent the next few weeks at Mara's avoiding my mother's calls. She left voicemails, her tone shifting from annoyed to pleading, but I wasn't ready to face her. I got a job at a coffee shop, the kind of place where the regulars knew your name and tipped in quarters. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start saving, to prove to myself I could survive without her. I enrolled in the community college, taking night classes in music theory and composition. The campus was nothing special, linoleum floors, flickering lights, but it felt like a new world, one where I wasn't defined by my sister's mistakes or my mother's choices. I started writing music again, not just playing it. I poured my anger, my grief, my hope into every note, creating pieces that felt like pieces of me. Christmas came and I didn't go home. My mother called, her voice tight with disbelief. "You're really not coming?" "After everything I've done for you, I didn't answer. I couldn't. I spent the day with Mara eating takeout and watching bad holiday movies, trying to convince myself I wasn't missing anything. But the truth was, I missed the idea of family, the one I'd never really had. I missed the piano, the way it had anchored me through every storm. And I missed the version of myself who still believed love didn't come with a price tag. By spring, I was finding my footing. My professors noticed my work, one of them calling my compositions raw but powerful. I started performing at open mic small venues where the crowds were kind but sparse. Each time I played, I felt a little stronger, a little more like the person I was meant to be. Mara came to every show cheering louder than anyone, her pride a balm for the wounds I still carried. Mrs. Callahan kept in touch, sending me articles about music programs, encouraging me to dream bigger. I began to believe I could, that maybe, just maybe, I was enough. But the past has a way of catching up. One night after a performance at a local bar, I saw Lila in the crowd. She was leaning against the wall, her arms crossed her face, unreadable. I hadn't seen her in months, hadn't wanted to. My hands froze on the keys, but I kept playing, forcing myself to finish the piece. When I stepped off the stage, she was waiting. "You're good, Ellie," she said, her voice softer than I expected. I didn't know. I wanted to believe she meant it, but I knew her too well. There was always an angle, always a need. Sure enough, she asked for money, $500 just to get by. I said no, my voice steady for the first time in years. She left without another word, and I felt a weight lift, even as my heart ached. I was learning to say no, to choose myself. It wasn't easy. Every step forward felt like walking through quicksand, the pull of my family's expectations threatening to drag me back. But I kept going, driven by a fire I hadn't known I had. I was Eleanor, the girl who'd lost her piano but found her voice. and I wasn't done yet. The months after that night with Lila blurred into a rhythm of survival and small victories, each one hard-won, like pulling thorns from my skin. I was still crashing on Mara's couch, the springs creaking under my weight every night. A constant reminder that I was a guest in my own life. The coffee shop job paid enough to cover my classes and a few basics, but I was always one late shift or broken bus away from falling apart. Still, I showed up to work, to school, to the open mics where I played my heart out for half-drunk crowds who sometimes listened. I was building something, even if it was fragile, even if it felt like stacking cards in a storm. My music was changing, growing sharper, more honest. I stopped trying to mimic the composers I'd studied and started writing from the ache in my chest. My songs were about loss, about betrayal, about the quiet rage of being overlooked. One piece. Shades of Absence was about the piano, its weight, its silence, the way its absence left a hole in me I couldn't fill. When I played it at a college showcase, the room went still, the kind of quiet that hums with feeling. Afterward, a professor pulled me aside, a wiry man with glasses too big for his face. "You've got something, Eleanor," he said. "Not just talent, truth." His words stayed with me, a spark in the dark, but they couldn't erase the weight I carried. I hadn't spoken to my mother since Christmas, though her voicemails kept coming, each one a mix of guilt and accusation. "Ellie, this is ridiculous. You can't just cut us off. We're your family." I deleted them, but they lingered like bruises under my skin. I wanted to believe I was done with her, with all of them, but the truth was messier. I missed her, not the woman who sold my piano, but the one who used to hum Patsy Cline while scrubbing pots, the one who'd slip me an extra pancake when Lila wasn't looking. That mother felt like a ghost, now buried under years of choices I couldn't forgive. Mara was my anchor, the one who kept me from drifting too far into my own head. She was a bartender with a laugh that could cut through any tension, and she had a way of seeing through my walls. One night, after a long shift, she dragged me to a diner, the kind with sticky tables and coffee that tasted like regret. "You're doing it, you know," she said, pointing a fry at me. "You're making a life. Screw your mom, screw Lila. You're enough." I wanted to believe her, but the doubt was a shadow I couldn't shake. I'd spent so long being less important, less loved, that being enough felt like a language I didn't speak. Then there was Mrs. Callahan, who became more than a mentor, more like a grandmother I'd been allowed to keep. I visited her every Sunday, playing her Steinway, while she sipped tea and told stories about her own life. Her husband who died young, her dreams of being a concert pianist she'd traded for stability. "We all make sacrifices," she said. Once her eyes distant, "but don't let them define you." She pushed me to apply for a scholarship at a small music conservatory in Pittsburgh, a step up from community college, a chance to study with real composers. The application was daunting, essays, recordings, a live audition, but she wouldn't let me back down. "You're ready, Eleanor," she said. "The question is, do you believe it?" I didn't, not really. But I worked for it anyway, spending nights in the college practice rooms. My fingers aching, my heart racing with fear and want. I recorded Shades of Absence on a borrowed keyboard, the sound tinny but raw, and wrote an essay about why music mattered to me. It was the hardest thing I'd ever written, every word a confession. I talked about my grandmother, about the piano, about the way music had saved me when nothing else could. I didn't mention my mother or Lila, not directly, but their shadows were there in every line about loss and resilience. When I mailed the application, I felt like I'd sent a piece of my soul into the world, fragile and exposed. Waiting for a response was torture. I threw myself into my routine classes, work gigs to keep the anxiety at bay. One night at an open mic in a dive bar, I met Sam, a guitarist with a crooked smile and a voice like gravel. He asked to jam with me, and we ended up playing a duet, my piano weaving around his chords. The crowd loved it, and for the first time in months, I felt light, like I could be more than my pain. Sam became a friend, someone who got the grind of chasing art in a world that didn't care. He'd grown up in foster care, bouncing between homes, and music was his lifeline too. "You're a fighter, Ellie," he said once after we'd stayed up till dawn, writing a song. "You just don't see it yet." But the darkness was never far. One afternoon, I got a call from Lila. I almost didn't answer, but something curiosity maybe, or masochism, made me pick up. "I'm in trouble, Ellie," she said, her voice thick with tears. She'd been evicted, was crashing with a friend, and needed $1,000 to get back on her feet. "I know I've messed up, but I'm trying to change. Please." I listened, my stomach twisting, and for a moment I saw the sister I'd wanted her to be, vulnerable human reaching out. But then I remembered the piano, the years of her taking without giving, the way she'd never once asked about me. "I can't," I said, my voice cold. "Not this time." She hung up, and I sat there shaking, wondering if I'd done the right thing, or if I'd just burned the last bridge to my family. The scholarship decision came a week later, a thick envelope in Mara's mailbox. My hands trembled as I opened it, half expecting rejection. But there it was, full tuition, a spot in the conservatory's composition program. I read it 3 times, convinced it was a mistake. When I showed Mara, she screamed and hugged me so hard I couldn't breathe. "You did this, Ellie, you." We celebrated with cheap wine and pizza, and for one night, I let myself believe I was enough. I called Mrs. Callahan, and she cried, her voice breaking over the phone. "I knew you could do it," she said. "Now go show them who you are." Moving to Pittsburgh was surreal. I found a tiny studio apartment, barely bigger than a closet, and got a job at a music store selling sheet music to kids and retirees. The conservatory was intimidating classrooms filled with prodigies professors who'd performed at Carnegie Hall, but I threw myself into it, writing music that felt like bleeding in the best way. My professors pushed me, tearing apart my work, only to help me rebuild it stronger. I started to see myself differently, not as the girl who'd lost her piano, but as Eleanor the composer, the one who turned pain into sound. Sam visited sometimes, crashing on my floor, and we'd write songs until the neighbors banged on the walls. He was the first person I told about the piano. The real story, not the polished version I gave others. "That's some heavy shit," he said, strumming his guitar. "But look at you now. You're still here, still making music. That's power." His words stuck with me, a reminder that survival was its own kind of victory. My mother called again a few months into my first semester. I was in the practice room, my fingers sore from hours of scales, when her number flashed on my phone. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Ellie, I heard you're in some fancy school now," she said, her tone a mix of pride and resentment. "I hope you're not too good for us now." No mention of the piano, no apology, just that same old guilt trip. I deleted the message, but it left a sour taste. A reminder that some wounds don't heal, they just scar. I was learning to live with the scars, though. My music was my voice, louder than ever, and I was finding people who heard it. Classmates, professors, audiences at the conservatory's recitals. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was Eleanor, the girl who'd lost everything and kept going, the girl who was writing her own story note by note. But the past wasn't done with me yet, and I could feel it waiting like a storm on the horizon. Pittsburgh was a city of bridges and gray skies, and in my first year at the conservatory, I felt like I was crossing a bridge of my own, one that swayed with every step. The scholarship covered tuition, but I was still scraping by. My life a patchwork of music store shifts, instant noodles, and late nights in the practice rooms. The conservatory was a world I didn't quite belong to yet. Students with private lessons, since they were 5 professors who spoke in cadences I was still learning to understand. But I showed up, my hands steady on the keys, my compositions growing bolder, more mine. I was 23, and for the first time I felt like I was running toward something, not just away. My days had a rhythm, classes in the morning, work in the afternoon, composing until the janitors kicked me out of the practice rooms. My professors were tough, dissecting my work with a precision that left me raw but better. One, Dr. Nguyen, a composer with a reputation for being unyielding, took an interest in me. "Your music has a pulse," she said after I played a new piece, "but it's holding back. Let it bleed." Her words were a challenge, and I took it, writing pieces that dug deeper, that hurt to create. One fracture was about the moment I watched my piano leave the sound of its absence louder than any note. When I performed it at a student recital, the audience was quiet for a long beat before they clapped, and I knew I'd done something real. Sam was still in Erie, but we talked often, texting about music or life or nothing at all. He'd send me rough recordings of his songs, and I'd critique them, our friendship a lifeline across the miles. He came to Pittsburgh once, dragging his guitar case through the snow, and we played a gig at a coffee shop, my keyboard, and his voice weaving something raw and beautiful. Afterward, over beers, he told me he was proud of me. "You're not just surviving Ellie," he said. "You're building something." His belief in me was a mirror showing me a version of myself I was starting to recognize. Mara visited too, her energy a burst of color in my monochrome routine. She'd gotten a better job managing a bar and was saving for her own place. "Look at us," she said one night, sprawled on my floor with a bottle of wine. Two kids from nowhere making it happen. She asked about my family gently, and I told her I hadn't talked to my mother in months, that Lila had gone quiet after I refused her money. Mara didn't push, just squeezed my hand and said, "You're allowed to choose you." Her words were a permission I hadn't known I needed. Mrs. Callahan sent letters, her handwriting shaky, but warm, filled with encouragement and news about her garden or her cat. She'd enclosed a photo once of me playing her Steinway, my face focused, almost peaceful. "This is who you are," she wrote. "Don't forget." I kept the photo taped to my mirror, a reminder when the doubt crept in. And it did creep in, especially at night when I was alone with my thoughts. I'd lie on my thrift store mattress, the city humming outside, and wonder if I was fooling myself, if I'd ever be more than the girl whose mother chose her sister's debt over her dreams. The conservatory gave me a chance to prove I could be more. In my second semester, Dr. Nguyen nominated me for a student composer, showcase a big deal with industry people in the audience. I was terrified, but poured everything into my piece, a suite called Unseen. It was about invisibility, my grandmother's, every woman who'd ever been overlooked. I spent weeks refining it, skipping meals, barely sleeping, my world narrowing to the notes on the page. When the night came, I played like my life depended on it, my fingers trembling but sure. The applause was loud, but what stayed with me was Dr. Nguyen's nod, a small gesture that felt like a door opening. After the showcase, a woman approached me. Her cardigan expensive, her smile practiced. She was from a small record label, interested in new composers. "Your work has a voice," she said, handing me her card. "Let's talk." I was too stunned to say much, just nodded and clutched the card like it might disappear. When I told Sam, he whooped over the phone. "That's your shot, Ellie. Take it." I wanted to, but fear was a heavy thing, whispering that I wasn't ready, that I'd fail. I tucked the card in my drawer, promising myself I'd call soon, just not yet. My mother's calls had stopped, but Lila reached out again, a text this time. "Can we talk? I'm sorry." I stared at it for an hour, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think she could change, but the bigger part remembered every time she'd let me down. I didn't respond, but the text sat there, a splinter I couldn't pull out. A week later, I got a letter from my mother, handwritten, the first in years. "Eleanor," it began. "I don't understand why you're doing this. Lila's trying to get better, but you're shutting us out. I sold that piano for her, yes, but it was for all of us. You're being selfish." I read it 3 times, each word a blade, then tore it up, my hands shaking. Selfish. The word burned, but I was starting to see it differently. Maybe selfish was just another word for choosing myself. I threw myself into my music, letting it carry the anger, the grief, the hope. I started working with a small ensemble, other students who believed in my work. We rehearsed in a basement studio, our notes echoing off concrete walls. And I felt a spark of something new, community maybe, or purpose. One of the violinists, Clara, became a friend, her quiet intensity a match for my own. She'd grown up with a father who thought music was a waste, and we bonded over the ways we'd had to fight for our art. "You're not invisible here," she said once after a late rehearsal. "We see you." Her words were a gift, one I tucked away for the hard days. Those hard days came. The music store cut my hours, and I was back to skipping meals, counting pennies for bus fare. I'd walk home in the dark, Pittsburgh's wind, biting through my coat, and wonder if I'd made a mistake, if I should have stayed in Erie, played it safe. One night I broke down sitting on my floor with a half-eaten can of soup, crying so hard I couldn't breathe. I called Mrs. Callahan, my voice a mess, and told her I didn't know if I could keep going. "You're stronger than you think," she said, her voice steady. "You've lost before, and you're still here. This is just another loss you'll turn into music." She was right, but in that moment, all I could feel was the weight. I kept going because stopping wasn't an option. I called the woman from the record label, my voice shaking as I left a message. She called back, and we met at a cafe where she talked about commissioning a piece for a film score. It wasn't a guarantee, just a possibility, but it felt like a crack in the wall I'd been pushing against. I wrote like I was running out of time, my music sharper, braver. Dr. Nguyen noticed, pulling me aside after class. "You're not holding back anymore," she said. "That's when the real work begins." By summer I was different, not whole, not healed, but stronger like a bone that's broken and set. I was still the girl who'd lost her piano, but I was also Eleanor the composer, the fighter, the one who kept showing up. I didn't know what was coming, but I was ready to meet it, scars and all. My family was a shadow I couldn't outrun, but I was learning to live in the light I was making for myself, and that light was growing brighter than I'd ever imagined. The summer after my first year at the conservatory was a turning point, the kind you don't see until you're looking back. I was 23, living in a shoebox apartment with a leaky faucet and a view of a brick wall, but I felt alive in a way I hadn't before. The commission from the record label came through, a small one, for a short film, but it was mine. They wanted a score that felt haunted but hopeful, and I knew exactly what to do. I wrote it in a frenzy, locking myself in the practice room for days, my fingers chasing the sound of my own heart. When I sent the final tracks, the producer called me personally. "You nailed it, Eleanor," she said. "We're going to want more from you." Those words were a spark, igniting something I hadn't dared to name ambition. The money from the commission wasn't much, but it was enough to quit the music store and take fewer shifts at a new job waitressing at a jazz club downtown. The club was a haven, all dim lights and velvet curtains, where musicians played like they were confessing. I'd linger after my shifts, nursing a soda, listening to the way the notes carried stories. Sometimes I'd bring my notebook, jotting down ideas for my own work. The other waitresses, mostly artists themselves, treated me like family, slipping me extra tips or leftovers when the manager wasn't looking. One, a painter named Tessa, saw me sketching melodies on a napkin and said, "You're the real deal, aren't you?" I laughed it off, but her words stuck another brick in the foundation I was building. School was harder that fall, the expectations higher. Dr. Nguyen pushed me to submit unseen to a national composition contest, the kind with a cash prize and a performance at Lincoln Center. I hesitated. My music felt too personal, too raw for a stage that big, but she wouldn't let me back down. "You're not writing for them," she said. "You're writing for the girl who needed that music to survive." So I polished the suite, spending weeks in the studio, tweaking every measure until it sang. Clara and the ensemble helped their instruments, giving my notes a life I couldn't have imagined alone. When I sent the submission, I felt like I'd bared my soul to strangers, and the waiting was agony. Sam was a constant, even from Erie. He'd started gigging more, landing a residency at a bar, and we'd trade voice memos critiquing each other's work. He came to Pittsburgh for a weekend, and we busked in Market Square. my portable keyboard, and his guitar drawing a small crowd. A kid tossed $1 in our case, and Sam laughed, saying, "We're rich, Ellie." That night over takeout in my apartment, he told me he'd gotten a call from a producer in Nashville, a chance to record a demo. "If I go, you're coming with me," he said. "We'll take over the world." I smiled, but inside I was scared not of failing, but of how much I wanted it, how much I was starting to believe I could have it. Mara came to visit too, her new apartment in Erie a point of pride. She dragged me to a thrift store, insisting I needed real clothes for my fancy composer life. We laughed until we cried, trying on ridiculous hats, and for a moment I was just a girl with her best friend, not the one carrying a decade of hurt. She asked about my family, and I admitted I hadn't heard from my mother since her letter that Lila's texts had stopped. "Good," Mara said fierce. "You don't need their baggage." But I wasn't sure. The silence from them felt like a wound that hadn't closed, one I didn't know how to heal. Then the contest results came. I was in the practice room, avoiding my phone, when Clara burst in, waving her laptop. "You won, Ellie. You freaking won." I didn't believe her until I saw the email. First place, $5,000 a performance in New York. My hands shook as I read it, the words blurring through tears. Dr. Nguyen called, her voice warm with pride. "This is just the beginning," she said. I told Sam, and he screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away. Mara sent me a string of confetti emojis and a promise to come to the performance. Even Mrs. Callahan, her voice frail over the phone, said, "I knew you'd shine, Eleanor." For the first time, I felt like I was shining, like the light I'd been chasing was finally mine. The trip to New York was surreal. The conservatory paid for my flight, and I stayed in a budget hotel with scratchy sheets, but I didn't care. Lincoln Center was overwhelming, all marble and chandeliers, and I felt small until I saw my name in the program, Eleanor Hayes Composer. The ensemble was professional, their rehearsal flawless, and when they played Unseen, it was like hearing my own heartbeat amplified. The audience, strangers in suits and dresses, stood at the end, their applause, a wave that carried me. Afterward, a man in a tweed jacket introduced himself as a scout for a film scoring agency. "We need voices like yours," he said, handing me his card. I floated back to Pittsburgh, my head spinning with possibility. The prize money let me breathe. I paid off my credit card, bought a used keyboard, and moved to a slightly less terrible apartment, one with a window that let in actual sunlight. I started working with the film scoring agency, small projects at first, but each one a step. My music was out there in the world, touching people I'd never meet. I was still scared, still doubted myself, but I was doing it, writing, performing, living. I was Eleanor, not the girl who'd lost her piano, but the woman who'd found her voice. Of course the past doesn't stay buried. A week after New York, I got a call from an unknown number. I answered expecting a wrong number, but it was Lila. "I saw you on the internet," she said, her voice strange, like she was trying to sound happy. "Some article about your music. You're a big deal now, huh?" I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, but another part, the stupid part, hoped she'd changed. She hadn't. "I'm proud of you, Ellie," she said, and then like clockwork, "I just need a little help. A few $100, I'll pay you back." I laughed bitter and told her no. "You don't get to do this," I said. "Not anymore." I hung up, my heart pounding, but I felt free, like I'd finally cut a cord that had been choking me. My mother was next. She sent an email, short and stiff. "Heard about your award. Congratulations. I hope you'll come home for Thanksgiving." No apology. No acknowledgement of the piano or the years of neglect. I stared at the screen, my anger flaring, then fading into something sadder. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. It sat in my inbox, a reminder that some things don't resolve, they just linger. I kept moving forward. Dr. Nguyen connected me with a mentor, a composer who'd scored Oscar-nominated films. He was gruff but kind, tearing apart my work, only to show me how to make it sing. I started performing more, not just at school, but at festivals, small venues, places where people came to listen. Clara and I wrote a piece together, a duet for piano and violin, and when we played it at a local theater, the crowd gave us a standing ovation. I was building a life one note at a time, and it was mine, not my mother's, not Lila's mine, but the scars were still there tender when I pressed them. I'd catch myself wondering if my mother ever regretted selling the piano, if Lila ever thought about the cost of her choices. I didn't have answers, and maybe I never would. What I did have was my music, my friends, my fight. I was Eleanor Hayes, and I was enough, not because anyone else said so, but because I was proving it every single day. By my second year at the conservatory, I was 24, and the world felt like it was opening up, even if it was still a fight to keep my place in it. The film scoring agency was sending me steady work, small indie projects. A few commercials, nothing glamorous but enough to make me feel like I was contributing something real. Each job was a chance to stretch, to find new ways to tell stories through sound. I'd sit in my tiny apartment, the keyboard balanced on a rickety table, and lose myself in melodies that felt like they were pulled from my bones. The money wasn't great, but it was mine earned through my music, not through someone else's approval or sacrifice. That alone was a kind of freedom I hadn't known I could have. The jazz club job became more than a paycheck. The owner, a grizzled saxophonist named Ray, started letting me play. During open mic nights, slipping me a few bucks under the table. The first time I performed there, my hands shook so badly. I missed half my chords, but the crowd musicians mostly clapped anyway, their encouragement rough but genuine. Ray pulled me aside after and said, "You've got soul, kid. Keep showing up." So I did every Thursday, playing pieces that grew bolder each week. The club became a second home, a place where I wasn't Eleanor the disappointment or Eleanor the invisible, but Eleanor the composer, the one who could hold a room with her music. School was a whirlwind. The contest win had raised my profile, and professors who'd barely noticed me before were now stopping me in the halls, asking about my work. Dr. Nguyen pushed me harder, assigning me to lead a student orchestra for a new composition, a symphony I called Reclaim. It was ambitious, maybe, too ambitious, weaving together themes of lost resilience and defiance. Directing the rehearsals was terrifying. I was younger than most of the musicians, and some didn't hide their skepticism, but I learned to hold my ground, to trust my vision. When we performed it at the spring recital, the audience was on its feet, and Dr. Nguyen hugged me afterward, a rare crack in her usual reserve. "You're not just a composer," she said, "you're a leader." Her words were a weight and a gift, one I carried carefully. Clara was my rock at school, her friendship a steady thing in the chaos. We'd spend hours in the practice rooms, her violin, dancing around my piano, our music, a conversation no one else could hear. She was applying to grad schools, dreaming of orchestras in Europe, and her ambition pushed me to dream bigger too. One night over ramen in her dorm, she told me she'd seen my name in a local arts blog, a review of my recital performance. "You're not invisible anymore, Ellie," she said, her eyes bright. "People are starting to see you." I wanted to believe her, but part of me still felt like the girl in the driveway, watching her piano disappear. Sam was chasing his own dreams, recording his demo in Nashville. He'd call late at night, his voice tired but alive, telling me about studio sessions and industry types who talked big but meant little. He sent me a rough cut of a song he'd written about me, "Girl with the Fire," all raw chords and lyrics about rising from ashes. I cried when I heard it, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. He came to Pittsburgh for a weekend, and we played a gig at the jazz club, our duet tighter than ever. Ray offered us a regular slot, and though Sam couldn't stay, he made me promise to keep performing. "You're a star, Ellie," he said, half teasing, half serious. "Don't let anyone dim you." Mara was thriving too, her bar job turning into a management role. She'd text me photos of her new apartment, all bright walls and second-hand furniture, and I'd feel a pang of pride mixed with envy, not for her success, but for how easily she seemed to move forward, unburdened by a family like mine. When she visited, we went to the jazz club, and she watched me play her cheers louder than anyone's. Afterward, she pulled me into a hug and said, "I always knew you'd do this, even when you didn't." Her faith in me was a tether keeping me grounded when the doubts came. And they did come. Success, even the small kind, was a strange thing. It made the old wounds ache in new ways. I'd be in the middle of a scoring session or a rehearsal, and I'd hear my mother's voice calling me selfish, or see Lila's face asking for money she'd never repay. I hadn't heard from either in months, but their absence was as heavy as their presence had been. I started writing a new piece, Echoes of Sold Things, pouring all of it into the music, the betrayal, the longing, the anger I still carried. When I played it for Clara, she was quiet for a long time before saying, "That's the most honest thing you've ever written." It was, and it hurt, but it also felt like reclaiming something they'd taken. The film scoring agency offered me a bigger project, a feature film with a real budget. It was a drama about a woman escaping an abusive marriage, and the director wanted a score that felt like a heartbeat, breaking and mending. I said yes, even though I was terrified, and spent weeks researching, watching rough cuts, sketching themes. The work was grueling, but it was mine, and when I delivered the final tracks, the director cried, saying I'd given her story a soul. That project got me noticed. A few blogs mentioned my name, and I started getting emails from other directors, small ones, but still. I was building a career, note by note, and it felt like a miracle. Mrs. Callahan's health was fading, and I made time to call her voice weaker, but still sharp. She'd seen the arts blog about my recital and read it to me over the phone, her pride palpable. "You're doing what I never could," she said. "Don't stop, Eleanor." I promised I wouldn't, but the calls were harder, knowing each one might be the last. She sent me a package, a scarf she'd knitted soft and blue with a note. "For the cold days, you're my legacy." I wore it every day, a piece of her strength wrapped around me. Then came the letter from my mother. It arrived on a rainy afternoon, her handwriting jagged, like she'd written it in a hurry. "Eleanor," it said, "I saw your name in the paper. I didn't know you were doing all this. Lila's in rehab now, trying to get clean. I'm proud of you, but I wish you'd come home. We're still your family." No mention of the piano, no sorry, just that same pull to return to a place that had never felt like home. I sat with it for days, the words stirring up a storm I thought I'd weathered. I didn't write back, but I didn't throw it away either. It lived in my drawer next to the record label card I'd once been too scared to use. The film score premiered at a festival in Philadelphia, and I went my first time at something like that. The theater was small but packed, and when the credits rolled, my name flashed on the screen, music by Eleanor Hayes. The audience clapped, and I felt a rush, not just of pride, but of ownership. I'd made that, me. Afterward, a woman in the crowd asked for my autograph, saying the score had made her cry. I signed her program, my hand shaking, and realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was creating, impacting, being seen. Back in Pittsburgh, I kept pushing. The agency offered me another film, and Dr. Nguyen nominated me for a Young Composers Fellowship, a year-long program in Los Angeles with a stipend and mentorship. It was a long shot, but I applied, spending weeks on the portfolio, including Echoes of Sold Things. Clara helped me record it, her violin a perfect counterpoint to my piano. Submitting it felt like sending a piece of my heart into the unknown, but I was getting used to that, trusting my work, trusting myself. I was changing not just as a composer, but as a person. I stood taller, spoke louder, didn't apologize for taking up space. The girl who'd stood silent in the driveway was still there, but she was quieter now, her voice drowned out by the woman I was becoming. I didn't know what was next, but I knew I was ready, not because I had all the answers, but because I had me, and that was enough. The fellowship decision came in the spring of my third year at the conservatory when I was 25, and starting to feel like the ground beneath me was solid. I was in the jazz club wiping down tables after a shift when my phone buzzed with an email from the fellowship committee. My hands were sticky with soda, and I almost dropped the phone as I opened it. Dear Eleanor Hayes, it began. We are pleased to offer you a place in the Young Composers Fellowship in Los Angeles. I read it twice, then sank onto a bar stool, my legs unsteady. A year in LA, a stipend mentorship with some of the best in the industry. It was more than I dared to dream. Ray caught me staring at the screen and poured me a shot of whiskey, grinning. To you, kid, he said. Go make us proud. Telling people was surreal. Clara screamed and hugged me until I couldn't breathe, promising to visit. Sam called from Nashville, where he was scraping by, but still gigging, and said, I knew you'd do it, Ellie. You're unstoppable. Mara sent a care package coffee, a tacky LA keychain, and a note that read, You're a badass. Own it. Dr. Nguyen just nodded like she'd expected it and said, This is where you belong. Don't hold back. Mrs. Callahan was frail. Now her voice a whisper over the phone, but she cried when I told her, saying, You're living my dreams, Eleanor. Thank you. Each reaction was a thread weaving a safety net I hadn't known I needed. Moving to LA was daunting. I packed my life into 2 suitcases, my keyboard, some clothes, Mrs. Callahan's scarf, and left Pittsburgh with a mix of terror and exhilaration. The fellowship provided a shared apartment, a small space with a view of palm trees and traffic. My roommate, a cellist named Priya, was kind but intense, her focus a mirror of my own. The program was grueling workshops, deadlines, critiques from mentors who didn't sugarcoat. My first mentor, a composer named Victor, who'd scored blockbusters, tore apart my initial submission, saying it was pretty but safe. I went home and cried, then rewrote it, letting the raw edges show. When I played the new version, he nodded, a rare smile breaking through. That's you, he said. Keep digging. LA was a shock after Pittsburgh, bright, loud, relentless. I felt small at first, a nobody among people who seemed to know everyone. But the fellowship gave me a community, composers, performers, dreamers like me. We'd stay up late debating music theory or sharing cheap wine, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Priya became a friend, her dry humor cutting through my overthinking. One night, after a brutal critique, she dragged me to a dive bar and said, You're not here to be perfect, you're here to be Eleanor. It was simple, but it stuck, a reminder to trust the voice I'd fought so hard to find. Work was relentless but thrilling. The fellowship connected me to a studio, and I started scoring a web series, a gritty drama about addiction. The director loved my work, and soon I was juggling multiple projects, another short film, a podcast theme, even a video game. Each one was a chance to grow, to push my music further. I was making a name for myself, not a big one, but enough that people in the industry knew me as Eleanor Hayes, not just another composer. A local music blog called me a rising star with a knack for emotional depth, and though I cringed at the hype, I taped the article to my fridge, a quiet proof I was doing something right. Sam visited once, fresh off a tour with a small band. We went to the beach, a rare day off, and sat on the sand watching the waves. He was different now, more worn but still hopeful, and we talked about how far we'd come. You're not that scared kid anymore, he said, tossing a pebble into the water. You're a force. I laughed, but his words settled deep. He played me a new song, one he'd written about chasing dreams, and I added a piano line, our old magic still there. When he left, I felt a pang, not romance, but something softer. A gratitude for someone who'd seen me at my lowest and still believed in me. Mara came too, her visit a whirlwind of laughter and late-night talks. She was dating someone new, a chef who made her smile, in a way I hadn't seen before. We went to a rooftop bar, the city sparkling below, and she raised her glass to me. To the girl who didn't give up, she said. I clinked my glass, my throat tight, and realized how much I owed her couch, her faith, her refusal to let me disappear. She asked about my family, and I admitted I hadn't heard from them in over a year, not since my mother's last letter. You don't need them, she said, fierce as ever. You've got us. She was right, but the hole was still there. A quiet ache I carried. Mrs. Callahan's passing hit hard. I got the call from her neighbor, a kind woman who'd been checking on her. She was so proud of you, she said. I flew back to Erie for the funeral, a small service in a church that smelled of wax and old hymnals. I played Claire de Lune on the church piano, her favorite, my fingers steady even as my heart broke. Afterward, her neighbor gave me a box of her things: sheet music, a locket, a note in her shaky hand. Eleanor, you are my song. I wore the locket every day, a piece of her with me, as I navigated LA's chaos. The fellowship culminated in a showcase, a chance to present our work to industry insiders. I wrote a new piece, Resonance, a symphony that wove together everything I'd been through: the piano, my family, the fight to be seen. It was my boldest work yet, unapologetic and raw. The night of the showcase, the theater was packed, the air electric with nerves. When the orchestra played Resonance, I felt every note in my chest like I was hearing my own life. The applause was deafening, and afterward a producer approached me, offering a contract for a feature film score, a real one with a budget and a timeline. I said yes, my voice steady, and felt a shift like I'd crossed a threshold I could never uncross. Back in LA, I was busier than ever. The film score was a beast, but I loved every second working late in the studio, shaping sound into story. I was invited to speak at a women's arts conference, a panel on breaking into the industry. Standing on that stage, sharing my journey, I saw young women in the audience, their eyes wide, and I realized I was giving them what Mrs. Callahan had given me, proof that it was possible. I didn't mention my family, but they were there in the subtext of every word about resilience. Then came the email from Lila. I was in a cafe revising cues when it popped up. Ellie, she wrote, I'm out of rehab. I'm trying to stay clean. I saw your name in a magazine and I'm so proud. I know I've been awful, but I want to make things right. Can we talk? I stared at it, my coffee going cold. Part of me wanted to believe her, to think she could change, but the scars were deep and trust was a fragile thing. I didn't reply, not yet, but I saved the email a question I wasn't ready to answer. My mother called a week later, leaving a voicemail. Eleanor, I know you're busy, but I saw you in the news. You're doing so well. Lila's trying, and I'm trying too. Please call. Her voice was softer, almost broken, but there was no apology, no mention of the piano. I listened to it 3 times, then deleted it, my heart heavy, but my resolve firm. I wasn't ready to go back, not when I'd fought so hard to move forward. I was Eleanor Hayes, composer, fighter, survivor. My music was in films, on stages in the world. I was building a life that was mine, surrounded by people who saw me, who chose me. The past was still there, a shadow I couldn't outrun, but it was smaller now, less heavy. I was standing in my own light, and it was brighter than I'd ever imagined. The premiere of the feature film I scored was the kind of moment I'd once thought belonged to other people. Red carpets, flashing cameras, a theater filled with faces I didn't know. I was 26, standing in a borrowed dress at a venue in downtown LA, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear the chatter around me. The film was a drama about a mother and daughter rebuilding after years of estrangement, and my score, every note of it, was woven into their story. When the lights dimmed and the music swelled, I felt exposed like I'd laid my soul bare for strangers to judge. But as the credits rolled and my name appeared, music by Eleanor Hayes, the applause was a wave, warm and unrelenting. People turned to me, clapping, some with tears in their eyes, and I realized my music had reached them, had made them feel something real. It was the closest I'd ever come to flying. The after-party was a blur of handshakes and compliments. The director, a woman with sharp eyes and a warm laugh, pulled me into a hug and said, "You gave this film its heart, Eleanor. We're lucky to have you." A critic from a major outlet approached, asking for a quote about my process, and I stammered through something about music being my way of telling the truth. Later, I saw my name in her review. Eleanor Hayes's score is a revelation, a haunting tapestry of loss and hope. that elevates the film to new heights. I read it over and over my phone screen, glowing in the dark of my apartment, and for once I let myself believe it was true. The premiere was a turning point not just for my career, but for how I saw myself. Invitations started coming, panels, workshops, even a guest lecture at a music school. I was asked to score another film, a bigger one with a budget that made my head spin. A small label offered to release my concert works, including Resonance as an album. My name was out there not just in blogs, but in industry circles, whispered as someone to watch. I wasn't rich or famous, but I was working, creating, living the life I'd fought for. Each step felt like a defiance of the voice that had once told me I'd never be enough. Clara was in New York now, playing with a chamber orchestra, and we'd video call her tiny apartment as chaotic as mine. She'd seen the film and cried through half of it, texting me a string of heart emojis. "You're a genius, Ellie," she said, her voice crackling through the screen. "Don't forget us, little people." Sam was still in Nashville, grinding through club gigs, but he came to the premiere. His suit slightly wrinkled, but his grin wide. He pulled me into a bear hug and said, "Look at you, star. Told you you'd burn bright." We stayed up late that night, sharing a pizza and talking about the old days when we were just kids with dreams too big for our lives. His belief in me unchanged since Erie was a gift I didn't take lightly. Mara flew out too, her chef boyfriend in tow, and watching her dance at the after-party, carefree and proud, made my heart ache in the best way. She'd framed the film's poster and hung it in her bar, telling everyone I was her best friend. "You're unstoppable," she said, clinking her glass against mine. "And I get to say I knew you when." Her pride, like Sam's, like Clara's, was a mirror showing me a version of myself I was still learning to trust. But the past, as always, had a way of breaking through. A week after the premiere, I was back in LA, sorting through emails when I saw one from my mother. The subject was blank, and for a moment I considered deleting it unread. But I opened it, my hands cold. "Eleanor," she wrote, "I saw your film on TV. The music was beautiful. I didn't know you could do that. Lila's been sober 6 months working at a salon. We're trying to be better. I know I hurt you with the piano and everything. I'm sorry. Please come home for Christmas. We miss you." It was the first time she'd said sorry, the first time she'd named the piano. I sat there staring at the screen, my chest tight with a storm of feelings. Anger, grief, a flicker of hope I didn't trust. Lila called the next day, her voice hesitant but clear. "Ellie, I saw your movie. You're amazing. I'm so sorry for everything, for the money, for being a shitty sister. I'm trying to make it right. Can I see you?" I listened, my throat burning, and told her I needed time. She didn't push, just said, "I get it. I'll be here." When I hung up, I cried. Not the quiet tears of my old life, but a raw, wrenching sob that left me empty and strangely lighter. I didn't know if I could forgive them, but the fact that they were trying, that they'd seen me, shifted something inside. The moment I'd been waiting for came a month later at a music awards ceremony in LA, a smaller one but prestigious, where I was nominated for my film score. I didn't expect to win, my competition was seasoned, but when my name was called, the room spun. I walked to the stage, my dress catching on my heels, and took the award, its weight solid in my hands. The audience was a sea of faces, but I saw Sam, Mara, and Priya, their cheers cutting through the noise. My speech was short, my voice shaking. "This is for everyone who's ever felt invisible," I said. "Your voice matters. Keep going." The applause carried me off the stage, and for the first time I felt like I belonged there, not as an imposter, but as Eleanor Hayes, composer survivor enough. The news spread. Articles called me a breakout talent, and my inbox filled with offers, films, concerts, collaborations. I was invited to a gala for women in the arts where I met composers. I'd idolized women who shook my hand and said they'd heard my work. One, a legend in her 60s, pulled me aside and said, "You're doing what we fought for. Don't stop." Her words were a torch, lighting the path ahead. Then came the public twist I hadn't expected. A journalist writing a profile on me, for a national magazine dug into my backstory. I'd been vague about my family, mentioning only challenges and loss. But she found Lila online, piecing together bits of our history, her debt, the piano, the years of estrangement. The article was kind to me, framing it as a story of triumph, but it was raw, exposing wounds I'd kept private. It went viral, shared across social media, and suddenly my pain was public, a narrative for strangers to dissect. My mother called the day it published, her voice trembling. "Eleanor, I read the article. I didn't know how much I hurt you. I was wrong about the piano, about you. I'm so sorry." She was crying, and for the first time I believed her. Lila texted a simple message. "I'm ashamed of who I was. I'm trying to be better. You don't owe me anything, but I'm here." I didn't respond, not yet, but their words were a crack in the wall I'd built, letting in light I wasn't sure I wanted. The article brought something else, a flood of messages from women young and old who'd read my story and seen themselves. They wrote about their own betrayals, their own fights to be seen. One, a girl in Ohio, said my music gave her hope to keep playing her violin even when her family laughed. Another, a woman in her 40s, said she'd left a toxic marriage after hearing resonance. Their words were a weight and a gift, a reminder that my story wasn't just mine anymore. I started a scholarship in Mrs. Callahan's name, a small fund for young women, in music, my way of giving back what she'd given me. The awards night, the article, the messages, they were a reckoning, a moment where the world saw me and I saw myself. I stood taller, not because I'd won, but because I'd survived, because I'd turned my pain into something beautiful. My family's apologies were a start, but I wasn't ready to forgive, not fully. I was still Eleanor, still carrying scars, but they were part of me, not all of me. And I was ready for whatever came next. The months after the awards ceremony were a whirlwind, a life I barely recognized as mine. I was 26, living in LA, my days filled with scoring sessions, meetings with directors, and late nights refining concert pieces. The viral article had made me a name, not just in music circles, but in a broader, messier way. People knew my story, the piano, the sister, the mother who'd chosen debt over dreams. It was strange being seen so publicly, my pain a headline for others to share. But it also gave me a platform, a chance to speak, not just through music, but with my voice. I said yes to more panels, more interviews, each one a step toward owning my narrative. I wasn't just Eleanor the composer anymore. I was Eleanor the survivor, the one who'd turned betrayal into art. And that felt like a responsibility I couldn't ignore. Work was relentless, but exhilarating. The new film score, a historical drama about a woman defying her era's constraints, was my biggest yet. I spent weeks in the studio conducting a small orchestra, my hands steady even when my heart raced. The director trusted me, giving me room to experiment. And when I heard the final mix, my music swelling under sweeping visuals, I felt a pride so deep it hurt. The film premiered to strong reviews, my score singled out as a triumph of emotional storytelling. Offers poured in, another film, a TV series, a commission for a symphony hall in Chicago. I was building a career, not just a living, and each project was a brick in the life I'd dreamed of, one I'd made myself. Clara was thriving in New York, her orchestra touring Europe, and we'd send each other voice memos, her violin riffs answered by my piano chords. She came to LA for a weekend, and we stayed up late, drinking wine and laughing about our old conservatory days. "You're a force, Ellie," she said, her eyes serious. "You've always been." Sam was still in Nashville, his band gaining traction, and he'd text me grainy videos of his gigs, his voice rough with hope. When he played Girl with the Fire at a festival dedicating it to me, I watched the live stream with tears in my eyes, grateful for a friend who'd seen me before I saw myself. Mara was engaged now, her chef boyfriend planning a wedding in Erie, and she made me promise to be her maid of honor. "You're my family," she said over the phone, and I believed her, the word family softer in her mouth than it had ever been in mine. The scholarship in Mrs. Callahan's name was growing funded by a percentage of my royalties. I'd chosen the first recipient, a 17-year-old pianist from Detroit, whose essays echoed my own hunger. When I called to tell her, she cried, saying she'd never thought college was possible. I sent her a copy of Resonance and a note, "Your music matters, keep playing." Knowing I'd given her a piece of what Mrs. Callahan gave me was a kind of healing away to honor the woman who'd believed in me when I couldn't. My family was still a question I hadn't answered. My mother's apology, Lila's sobriety. They lingered a weight I carried but didn't know how to set down. I'd saved their messages, reading them sometimes, when the city was quiet, searching for a sign I could trust them. Part of me wanted to go home to see if they'd really changed, but another part, the one that remembered the driveway and the piano's absence, wasn't ready. I didn't hate them not anymore, but love was complicated, tangled in years of hurt. I was learning that family didn't have to mean obligation, that I could choose who held space in my life. One afternoon, I got a package from Erie no-return address. Inside was a small wooden box, the kind my grandmother used to keep her jewelry in. I opened it, my hands trembling, and found a note in my mother's handwriting. This was Ruth's. She'd want you to have it. Inside was a silver ring, simple but heavy one, I remembered on my grandmother's finger when she taught me my first chords. There was no letter, no explanation, just the ring and the note. I slipped it on the metal cool against my skin and felt a rush of grief and gratitude. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was something, a gesture, a bridge. I wore it every day, a piece of my grandmother, a reminder of the woman who'd seen me first. I was invited to perform Resonance at the Chicago Symphony Hall, a solo piano version, to open a festival of new composers. The hall was grand, all gold trim and velvet seats, and I felt small until I sat at the piano, its keys familiar under my fingers. The audience was a shadow beyond the spotlight, but I played for them, for me, for the girl who'd lost her piano and found her voice. Each note was a story: my grandmother's hands, Mara's couch, Sam's guitar, Mrs. Callahan's scarf, the driveway where I'd stood silent. When I finished, the silence was heavy, then shattered by applause, a standing ovation that shook me to my core. I bowed, my eyes wet, and knew I'd done something sacred. Afterward, a woman in the lobby stopped me, her face lined with age but bright with feeling. "Your music made me feel seen," she said, her hand on my arm. "Thank you." Others echoed her, strangers who'd heard their own lives in my notes. I realized then that my music wasn't just mine, it was theirs, a bridge between my pain and their own. That night, I wrote a new piece for the unseen, dedicated to every woman who'd ever felt erased. It wasn't finished, but it was a promise, a way to keep giving voice to those who needed it. I didn't go home for Christmas, not that year. I spent it in LA with Priya and some fellowship friends, eating takeout and playing bad holiday songs on my keyboard. Mara called her voice warm with wedding plans, and Sam sent a video of him singing Jingle Bells off-key, making me laugh until I cried. They were my family, not by blood, but by choice, and that was enough. I thought about my mother and Lila, wondered if they were together, if they were trying. I wasn't ready to see them, but I didn't rule it out. Forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip, it was a process, one I was still navigating. The ring on my finger was a symbol not just of my grandmother, but of what I'd learned my worth didn't depend on someone else's validation. Not my mother's, not Lila's, not even the industry's. I was Eleanor Hayes, composer, fighter woman who'd turned her scars into symphonies. My music was my truth, my way of saying I was here, I mattered, I would not be erased. The future was uncertain, more projects, more risks, more questions. About family, but I was ready for it, not because I had all the answers, but because I had myself. As I sat in my apartment, the city humming outside, I played a few bars of For the Unseen, the notes soft but sure. They were for me, for the girl in the driveway, for every woman who'd ever stood in her own shadow. I didn't know where the melody would lead, but I trusted it trusted the music to carry me forward. And that more than anything was my victory, not the awards, not the applause, but the quiet certainty that I was enough and always had been.